last week because we had so many people that have been absent, and there were people here, and we were like 35 chapters in, and so I did a really big overview last week. So this week I'm just going to focus on one chapter specifically for our overview, and then I'm going to catch us up from last week, and then we'll kind of keep building from there. So just to make sure everybody knows, we're studying the book of Genesis with one another. The book of Genesis is referred to as Bereshit, the beginning. And in the beginning is the actual word Reshit, which is the Hebrew word for beginning. And so that's where we are. When you look at Genesis 1:1, we are in the beginning. If you don't have the Bible app pulled up, because we're not going to do the projector behind me tonight, it messed with the video some last time. If you've got this on your phone, follow along in the Bible app, and we have it where you can look it up based on the location, and then there's also a link to the YouTube video within the Bible app. So if you don't have the Bible.com app, I would encourage you to make sure you take a look at that. All right, so tonight I want to talk to you about Genesis 1. Genesis 1 is where it all began, right? It's the creation story. It's God said. Ma'am? We are. We're going to get there, but I'm just getting everybody caught up. The question was, I thought we were way ahead of that. We are. I'm just trying to get everybody caught up and level a baseline. Everything follows a cycle out of Genesis 1. Literally the cycle of Genesis 1 of creation, and then sin entering creation, and then following the sin is the downfall of man. We find that constantly repeating itself through the Bible. And you say, Chad, what do you mean? How is it doing that? If we look at the first two humans, which were known as what? Not their name, but what is the Hebrew word to refer to mankind? Adam. Adam is the Hebrew word to refer to mankind. So when the Adam first sinned, they separated themselves from God in Genesis. And what happened as a result of that sin is that now we see a perpetual cycle that repeats itself over and over and over again throughout the entire Bible, as a matter of fact. The very next thing that we see after Adam and Eve go through the sin cycle is that we see who next? Their children. Cain and Abel. They enter the sin cycle. And then we see that over again in Noah. And then we see that over again in the people that come after Noah. And it's just over and over we keep entering this cycle of sin. Now what's interesting is that tonight we're nearing the time of Joseph. And Joseph, from your Bible school days and from if you went to Vacation Bible School or you had the felt boards inside your church or whatever, Joseph was best known for what? If you think about Joseph, the son of Jacob, what was he best known for? He had a coat of many colors. What else did Joseph have? What happened to Joseph's life? Think about it. He got sold off. Foster said he got sold off into slavery. To the Ishmaelites. Remember that? What was interesting, we've been studying the book of Genesis, and the Ishmaelites were the son of who? They came from Abraham. They came from the son of Abraham, Ishmael. Remember Ishmael? Isaac and Ishmael were brothers. And so we see the descendants literally coming into play still into the story of Joseph, and the Ishmaelites bought Joseph from his brothers. They took Joseph from Shechem, he was actually in Dothan where he was sold. If y'all remember, we talked about how he had traveled from Shechem up to Dothan, and he asked the guy in the field, said, y'all seen my brothers? And the guy said, yeah, they went north, and he went to Dothan. And up in Dothan, they actually threw Joseph in a cistern, a water pit, where they would use to catch water, and they sold Joseph out of that pit into slavery to some traders that were coming by known as the Ishmaelites and the Midianites. And then the Ishmaelites, they took Joseph to Egypt, and when Joseph got to Egypt, they sold him into Egypt, into Potiphar's house. And Potiphar was, we know, a well-known man in the Egyptian society because he had servants and all these other people. And we're going to enter tonight into that conversation, and we're going to see that Joseph is being blessed by who? By Yahweh. And it's very important that we pick Yahweh out tonight. Now, what's the difference between God in the Old Testament and Yahweh in the Old Testament? Does anybody remember the Hebrew word for God in the Old Testament that refers to a spiritual being? What did you say, Wes? Elohim. Elohim is the word that if we looked at the transliteration of the Hebrew word from Hebrew into English, we would see it as Elohim. Elohim. And Elohim, that Hebrew word, specifically means spiritual being. But oftentimes in our English translation, what you'll find is that they automatically translate that word from Elohim to what word? God. And so they just automatically, as translators, make that leap for us so that it makes our Bibles easier to read. Because we just don't read like Hebrews do. And so tonight, what you're going to notice is that the word God is used, and I'm going to make sure I point out to you that word Elohim, because it does not say Yahweh. And what does that tell you about these people if they refer to him as God instead of Yahweh? What does that say about their relationship to him? They don't what? You had it. Yeah, they don't know. They're not really following Yahweh of the Hebrews. They are recognizing a God of the Hebrews. Does that make sense? Because where is Joseph? Joseph is in Egypt. And what do we know about Egypt from a God standpoint? Egypt has many gods. They have gods, and you say, well, how do you know that? If we just look at antiquity outside of the Bible, what we're able to see is that they had a sun god named Ra. And then they believed that Pharaoh was a direct descendant of the gods, right? And then if you look at the moon god, and you look at the Nile god, and you look at the frog god, they literally had a god that if you look at the hieroglyphics inside tombs and other places, you'll actually see a human figure with a god head on top of it of a frog. And so your mind should be racing at this point all the way into the future of the Bible that we know, and you should be thinking about the plagues. What happened in one of the 10 plagues? The frogs. And why was it there? It was to destroy the gods of their mind that they had set up. But what we do know as well is that the Bible clearly shows us that there are powers that exist. And you say, Chad, why is that important in a backstory? Because we're still catching up to tonight. What the Bible clearly shows us is that there are evil powers in the world that have existed since the beginning of time and that exist to the times today. They're referred to as the powers. Where do those powers come from? We know that they come from not only the angels that were cast out of heaven, but what we've also been taught through our scripture is the Satan, as what it's actually referred to. We have grown up knowing him as the devil or Satan, but the Bible actually speaks of him as the Satan, the deceiver. Okay? And so whenever we think about that, our words don't even help us portray the image properly, because we call him Satan, or we call him the devil or something like that, and it's the Satan. And we're dealing with the demons that are associated with him. Those are the powers that we're dealing with on the backside of all this conversation. And those powers have been here ever since the Garden of Eden. In the very first few chapters, we see what kind of animal being inhabited by evil. A serpent, a snake. And what's so interesting, what did we learn about? Did I share with y'all the word Sarah, what it meant? Do y'all remember that? What did the word Sarah in Hebrew mean? A serpent. And what is the type of holy being that circles God that has 6 wings, 2 on the face, 2 on the body, and 2 on the feet? What is its name? A seraphim, which is a root of the word snake. So that is just amazing to think about. So what we see are these powers that exist that we can't see. And I would advocate to you that we're not supposed to see them. We are made in human form. We aren't made to live in our present state in 2 worlds, right? I mean, if we lived in the spiritual world as we know it and saw it as easily as we see the natural realm, think about how frightening that could be. You say, Chad, how do you know that? Because if you look back in the Scriptures, what we find is that literally at times through the Scriptures, angels are at war on the behalf of humans, And literally entire legions of angels are attacking entire villages and creating chaos and all this other kind of stuff. And the humans don't even realize what it is. But they just know they're under equivalent of spiritual warfare as we know it. And so we're seeing the beginnings of that now in the scriptures that we're studying. So any questions before we sort of jump into tonight with the scripture that we're about to go into? It's Elohim. In tonight's scripture, what you're going to almost always see is Elohim. Okay? So it says God, but if you look at the original Hebrew, it says Elohim. Okay? Sometimes it will say Yahweh, but most often you see Pharaoh specifically call it God. Okay? Any other questions before we get started? All right. So if you follow along in your Bible app, I'm going to screen mirror now, real quick, for the people that are online, I hope. Yes. It's it's not on WebEx. You'll have to use the Bible app. Do you have the Bible app loaded? Pull it up for me real quick. Does anybody else not have the Bible app loaded, or you need help? YouVersion. Mm-hmm. So what you do is you go to events. This is good for everybody. So what you do is you go to events, and then from events, it says Family Bible Study, and now you're in the lesson. Okay. All right, so here we are. We're on the Bible app, and we're looking at Genesis, and we're in our 17th session together. If you have to come back and you want to look at the YouTube video, by the way, if you just click the Save button at the top, it's got the link to the YouTube video down here inside this as well. So last week, we studied the fact that the relatives of Esau were being named. What was important about the relatives of Esau being named? Why was it important that all those names were listed? What did it tell us about Esau? The lineage, and what was the significance of that specifically? Who did he marry, and why was that important? What type of people did he marry? He married Canaanite women. And there we go. It was the intermarriages between all the tribes. And what do we know that the intermarriages do whenever you have that? How does that affect the religious culture of the Hebrews in this time period? Yes, David said it brings in different thoughts and different worship styles, and it brings in different gods as well, right? I mean Esau. The original, if we look at last week, we went through the whole big lineage of Esau, and there was all these kings and these daughters and the tribes, and there was just a ton of text that we skipped over because I was like, hey, there's just a bunch of names there. But the reason it's important is because we begin to see that the line of Esau, the Edomites, actually beginning to have problems with their worship and all those kind of things. Hey, Wyatt, I need y'all to leave that camera alone, okay? So what happens is Joseph, though, we see Joseph pop out of that from a storyline standpoint, and Joseph then becomes the focal point of the story. And Joseph is how old last week at the story that we intersected him? Y'all remember? He was about 17 years old, and he had that first dream, and the first dream was what happened in the first dream? Go ahead. Yes. So they built up, they cut the sheaths, and the sheaths were bundled up, and he was the primary one, and all the brothers' sheaths bowed down to him in that first dream. And then in that second dream he had the stars and the sun and the moon, and then, you know, his brothers again, and they essentially hated him for it. And his daddy said, you ought to stop talking about this, but yet he kept talking about it, and his daddy even put a long sleeve robe on him. Remember, we talked about the long sleeve robe that he had. And then whenever they tried to kill him, Reuben tried to save him. They ended up dipping his long sleeve coat in what? Goat blood. And so they dip it in goat blood, and they FedEx it back to his daddy, and his daddy assumes that he's been killed by a wild animal. They never said Joseph has been killed by a wild animal. They let their daddy stitch the story together in their own mind, in his own mind. And so now what we do is we scroll down and we look at the big picture this week. The big picture this week is Joseph becomes in prison for the refusal of Potiphar's wife, And then Joseph interprets dreams again in prison, and then Joseph ends up being brought before Pharaoh. So let's go down in Genesis chapter 39, verse 1. Genesis 39, verse 1. We're going to start. And it says, real quick, do you recall who brought Joseph from his brothers? It was the Ishmaelites or the Midianites? Both. The Ishmaelites and Midianites were a name that were transferred between one another. So now Joseph, verse 1. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, a court official of Pharaoh, commander of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the hand of the Ishmaelites who had brought him down from there. Where is there? Dothan. Dothan, where he was sold. Remember, that's where Joseph was sold. So they brought him all the way out of the land of the Canaanites, and they brought him down into Egypt and sold him there. Now, what's interesting is that what do we know about Potiphar from this account so far? He is a court official, he's a head of a guard, and so he's a man of importance. So he has also a home of importance, which means that he's probably got slaves and all these kind of things because he's a bigwig. So verse 2, and Yahweh was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. So what attributes to the success of Joseph? Why is he successful? Because of God of the Israelites, because of Yahweh. That is the reason he is successful. But look in verse 3. He says, and his master, Potiphar, observed that Yahweh was with him, and everything was in his hand to do, Yahweh made successful. Now, is that Potiphar recognizing Yahweh, or is that the author of Genesis recognizing that Yahweh? It's not Potiphar. It's not Potiphar. Absolutely, it is not Potiphar. What we're seeing here is that now what's happening is that he is the author of this book is saying we are crediting the success of Joseph to Yahweh, not to an Elohim. Does that make sense? Okay. So, did the master know Yahweh? No. We don't see any biblical account at this time that would acknowledge that he was a follower of Yahweh. He may acknowledge Yahweh, but it doesn't mean he is necessarily a follower of Yahweh. Does that make sense? Was Joseph a follower of Yahweh? That we firmly believe that Joseph was a follower of Yahweh from his daddy. From his daddy Jacob. So the best that because Jacob, Joseph's daddy, wrestled with Yahweh. He had the dream before he went to Padam-aram, and he had the dream of the angels, remember, going up and down. So we know Jacob/Israel followed Yahweh. But that is the best we can surmise, is that he would have learned that practice from his dad, but he probably wouldn't have learned it from whom? His mother. Because Rachel, remember, when Rachel left her daddy's house, what did Rachel take? The family idol. So we're dealing with, again, this intermixing of religious and non-religious followers of Yahweh, not followers of Yahweh, and kind of we have multiple deities, these kind of attitudes. And so, verse 4, and Joseph, and I put in here so that we could keep straight who's who. And Joseph found favor in his eyes, that being the master, and Joseph served the master. Then the master appointed Joseph over the master's house, and all that he owned, the master put into Joseph's hand. Does that make sense? There's a lot of he's and his and theirs, and I just want to make sure you had the right people there. And it happened that from that time he appointed him, the master appointed Joseph over the master's house and over all that the master had. Yahweh blessed the house of the Egyptian on account of Joseph. Okay? So Joseph has essentially what we would view as the Midas touch, right? That is everything Joseph touches, it is turning into gold from a reaping of a reward, a benefit. And you say, well, what kind of things might they be looking for in Egypt? It says the only thing that he worried about was his food.
But Joseph, he didn't know what was really going on, did he?
From what standpoint?
Yahweh was doing.
He knew, yes, Joseph was a follower of Yahweh, but all Potiphar knew is this dude follows this deity, So whoever his deity is, he must be extremely important. Does that make sense? So here's Potiphar, and he says, Potiphar realizes he's been blessed, and the blessing of Yahweh was upon the master, all that the master had in his house and in the field. So that means all of his servants probably were very healthy. That meant that his field was growing abundant crops. You know, his houses just ran very, very well. And as an aristocrat in Egypt, for lack of a better way to characterize it, what else do you want in life? All I got to worry about is what food I got on the table tonight. Is Pizza Hut delivering, or is it Front Porch Grill? You know, whatever it might be. And so in verse 6, and he left all that he had in the hand of Joseph, and he did not worry about anything except the food that he ate. That was all he worried about in life. What does that tell us about the master? But also, how does that tie into the rest of the storyline of Joseph's life? It tells us that the master knew he could trust regardless of what deity it was. Remember, because they had all kind of gods. They had 10 plus gods in Egypt. So what's one more? And if that God's blessing my household, I'm all for that God, right? But what that tells us about Joseph's life is that Joseph now is being pushed into a position of influence, which is going to later pay dividends for him, as we find out with Pharaoh. And we'll get there tonight. So now Yahweh was with Joseph, verse 7, and it happened that after these things that he had been blessed, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph. And she said, lie with me. Come to bed with me is what she pleads. But he refused and said to his master's wife, look, my master does not worry about anything except for his groceries. What is in his house and everything he owns, he puts into my hand. He has no greater authority in this house than me. Nobody, in other words, has greater authority than I do in this house. I am second only to the master. And he has not withheld anything from me except you. You are the only thing that I'm not allowed mastery over, since you are his wife. Now, how could I do this great wickedness and sin against who? Now, isn't that interesting?
Does it say Elohim?
It says Elohim. Yeah. So why would he say, do you notice who he's talking to? He's talking to an Egyptian woman. So he says, why would I sin against my Elohim? Very good. And she would not understand Yahweh, right? Yahweh's just another God. So he says, I'm not going to sin against God, because this is not a sin against Potiphar. It's a sin against God for me to take another man's wife. Have the 10 Commandments been given yet? Isn't that interesting? What do we know about Joseph's dad? How many wives did he have? 4? A few, yeah, a few. More than one? That's enough, you know. And so here we are, you know, he's saying, hey, I know I'm not supposed to do this. In verse 10, and it happened that as she spoke to Joseph day after day, she ain't got nothing to do. She's sitting around the house eating bonbons and watching soap operas, waiting on Joseph to walk by for eye candy. He did not heed her to lie beside her, or, look at this, or to be with her. Hold on. Why do we distinguish between he did not lie beside her or be with her? What's the difference there? There's an emotional dependency that she was placing. You see that? And even in our work environments today, this is the best place I can sort of connect it to. If you're a married couple, it is extremely dangerous to be at the water cooler if I'm a man visit every day to the same water cooler with this girl that I think is pretty or whatever, and I start trusting in conversation. You get my drift? And because what happens? After a little while, the conversation turns to this, and then it turns to that, and then the next thing you know, I'm talking to her as much as I'm talking to my wife, and I can't wait, and all of a sudden she's not at work that day, and my day's a wreck because I didn't get to see the girl that I usually talk. And you see where I'm going? That's essentially where we're at. He would not be with her. She would say, oh, Joseph, how's the day going? You've done a good job today. And he was just like, thank you, ma'am. You know, he just walks off. That's the image that we should have in our mind, is he's saying, I'm not going to sleep with you, and I'm not going to be with you emotionally. I'm not going to feed this beast that could create a problem for us. Verse 10, he did not heed her, lie with her, or be with her. Notice there's a lie between there. And so what happens in now verse 11, there's a lie. He would not lie with her, is what he was saying. He wouldn't be with her both physically and emotionally. Verse 11, but one particular day, he came in the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house were there in the house. Okay? I want you to scroll down for just a second in your Bible app. Scroll down for just a second, and you should see that picture that's there. That is what an Egyptian household dressed like. Joseph would have most likely been dressed as the second image from the left, with a headdress on, no shirt, and with a towel around his waist, and with probably a pair of what we would say underwear on. But they weren't, it was like a man diaper. Okay? So he probably had the equivalent of a man diaper. Okay? So here he is, and he's dressed. So let me just make sure you understand. Joseph is very handsome. Joseph is only probably 20-something at this point, maybe. Maybe he's probably 18, 19. And Joseph he's built. I mean, he looks good. He's fun. He's nice to look at from a female perspective. And it says he came into the house to do his work, and none of the men were in the house. Verse 12, she seized him by his garment. She grabbed him by the towel and said, lie with me. I can imagine her grabbing the front of his towel right there. She says, lie with me. And he left his garment. He's like, forget this. He done does it. And he just spins out from around her, and he takes off running. And he left it, and he fled, and he went outside the house. He just got away from her. He knew this is fixing to get really, she's fixing to strip me naked. And so now he leaves. And verse 13, and it happened that when she saw that he left his garment in her hand and fled outside, okay, she called to the men of her house and said, look, he brought a Hebrew. She's talking about her husband. He brought a Hebrew man to us to mock us. Whoa, 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 whoa. She did not accuse him of trying to do what? You see that? This is just my personal opinion. She probably was not very pretty. That's just my personal opinion. Because more than likely, if she was very attractive, she would probably have been like, oh, well, he tried to, sleep with me or whatever. All she could come up with is, I'm so ugly, he was trying to mock me. Does that mean? And so he's trying to mock me. That's me giving you a little storyline there. But he says, and I cried, and he came to me to lie with me and cried out with a loud voice. And when he heard me that I raised my voice and called out, he left his garment beside me and fled, and he went outside. He left, he got scared because I raised my voice. Then she put his garment beside her until his master came into the house. And here's poor Joseph. He's running around, nothing but his underwear on. Then she spoke to Potiphar when he came home, according to these words, the Hebrew slave that you brought to us came to make fun of me. Do you see why I think maybe she was a little homely, maybe, or had something going on? And it happened that as I raised my voice and I called out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside. Hold on a second. He came to make fun. Number one, I'd be like, Potiphar, did you listen to what she said to you? He came to make fun of her, and he took his garment off to make fun of her? Okay, I'm not CSI investigator in Egypt, but this just don't seem like it works out right. Why would he take his garment off of himself to make fun of you? Your lie just ain't stitching together. But anyway, Potiphar just gets mad. And Potiphar, at this point, begins, verse 19, and when his master heard the words of his wife that she had spoke to him, this is what your servant did to me, he became angry. He didn't get angry because Joseph tried to sleep with her, which, there again, he got angry because he was making fun of his wife, which, granted, if somebody made fun of my wife, they'd get a whooping too, right? I mean, that's just how life goes, but that's what he gets upset about. But look what happens. And Joseph's master, Potiphar, verse 20, took him and put him into prison, the place that the king's prisoners were confined. So what does that tell us about the jails in Egypt? There were certain levels. Because he was a guard to the king, he had access to the king's prison. But that's a perfect observation, is that there's obviously multiple levels of different prisons based on what kind of social class you might be. Right?
Is that better for Joseph or worse?
Oh, I think it's got to be better. I mean, it's like going to the pen over at Maxwell versus going to Draper. I mean, I'd much rather be at Maxwell, right, than Draper.
Well, I just wonder, like, if it's the king's prison, like you made the king mad, you're going somewhere really bad. I mean, I don't know.
Well, I think the effects too is that you've got the kingly household that you're going to be occupying prison with, and we're going to find out here in a minute. King don't have much problem sending somebody to prison for just about anything. But this prison obviously is a little better of prisons, if you can say that. As we move down in just almost 20, he was there in the prison, verse 21, and who was with Joseph? Notice Yahweh. Yahweh was with Joseph and showed, this is an interesting word. I love this word as I looked it up because I was like, that is an interesting combination. Loyal love to him and gave him favor in the eyes of the chief of the prison. Loyal love. So I had to get in my Bible and I started searching. I was like, where do we see this word loyal love? That's just not a common word that we see combined in the Bible with one another. And what's interesting is this word actually is used first in the Bible whenever Eleazar goes to get a bride for Isaac from Paddan Aram. So whenever Eleazar goes, remember that story? We studied this together. Eleazar goes because he says, I don't want you to take a son for my wife from these Canaanite women. Go back to my people and get a bride for my wife. Y'all remember that? And so whenever he walks up and he sees the woman that's going to become his wife, his son Isaac's wife, he says, oh, what a loyal love the Father, Yahweh has shown to me. So that's one place we see loyal love. And then even in Exodus 15:13, with God, when God leads the people out of Egypt, it talks about God's loyal love for those people. And I just think that's really interesting to see those two words combined there. Loyal love to Joseph, and gave Joseph favor in the eyes of the chief of the prison. So once again, Joseph finds himself, the Midas touch, for lack of a better way to say it, and he finds himself finding favor inside prison. And the chief of the prison put all the prisoners that were in the prison into the hand of Joseph. What do you mean they put the prisoners into the hand of Joseph? The care of the prisoners? Were their cell doors locked? Were their chains on? Are they receiving their ration of food for the day? Did they get water? You know, the menial task the Egyptians don't take on. That's always we see pushed down a level. And so he's doing the stuff that most people wouldn't want to do. And everything that was done there, he was the one who did it. Okay? He literally was taking care. He was trustworthy. And the chief of the prison did not worry about, have we seen that already? Chief of the prison didn't worry about anything in his hands, since Yahweh was with Joseph. And whatever he did, Yahweh made it successful. Now that's a testament again to the Hebrew readers and to the Hebrew writer of this, not to what the chief of the prison necessarily believed about who Elohim was. Does that make sense? So let's keep going. Notice he was in charge of the food too. Verse 40. And it happened that after these things, that the cupbearer of the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, and his baker did wrong against their Lord, against the king of Egypt. Now, what do we know was wrong? We don't. We don't have a clue. What's the job of the cupbearer? To taste the wine, to taste the drink before the king does, so that if he, he falls over, they're like, okay, that one's poisonous. Send the next cupbearer in, What's the job of the bread baker? To make nice bread for the king. I don't know if the bread baker overcooked it, if he undercooked it, if he put spices on it that the king was allergic to, that Pharaoh was allergic. We don't know. We just know that these two guys fell out of favor with Pharaoh. And Pharaoh, verse 2, was angry with his two officials, with the cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the commander of the guard, into the prison where Joseph was confined. king's prison, okay? So, verse 4, and the commander of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them, and they were in custody many days, awaiting whatever was awaiting. Maybe the king just said, you're 30 days in prison because your bread stunk, whatever. And so he sends him to prison. And the two of them, verse 5, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, dreamed a dream one night, each his own dream with its own interpretation. Now, what do y'all recall about divination and how the gods spoke to people? Through dreams. Specifically through dreams. Not the only way, right? We saw them speak through the liver of animals, through the birds flying, through the ways ripples in the waters moved. All those kind of things were divinations. But they believed that a god had spoken to them through this dream. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he looked at them, and behold, they were troubled. So he comes in to do his job, right? He's there to bring them their breakfast, a bacon, a meat and three. Here's your eggs and your bacon or whatever. And he asked the court officials of Pharaoh that were with him in custody of his master's house, why are your faces sad today? Now, what does that imply that he understands about these men if he's been with them for a while? He knows what they look like, just like I know David. I've been around David enough where I can see David and it's like, hey, what's bothering you, man? And if you're around somebody enough, right, you get to know that. And so he looks at him and says, what's the deal? And they said to him, we each dreamed a dream, but there's no one to interpret it. Because who usually interprets dreams inside Pharaoh's household? The diviners. Yeah, the diviners, the wise men, the ones that the dream readers, bring the people that can understand the magicians. Bring the magicians in so they can read my dreams. But there's no magicians in jail. They all have done a good job somehow. And they said to Joseph, we each dreamed a dream, but there's no one to interpret it. And Joseph said, do not interpretations belong to who? Isn't that interesting? He spoke to them in their language. Do you see that? Please tell them to me. Joseph says, why don't you tell me your dream? I'd like to know it. Now, I put a picture in here of an artist rendering of what what the cell might have looked like. Obviously, this is a more modern painting. Quite frankly, those people would not have looked like that, to be quite frank. Joseph probably would have been bald, to be quite frank. You say, Chad, how do you know that? Because whenever he gets ready to go before Pharaoh here in just a few sentences, what do they do to Joseph? They shave his head. So this picture's off, but it's the closest picture I could find, literally. We need new artists. Here we are. The next picture is the picture of a grapevine. That is the picture of a blossoming grapevine if you've never seen one. Okay? And that's important because we're going to study that here in just a second. That picture is a picture of a blossoming grapevine. Then the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph, and he said to him, in my dream, now behold, there was a vine before me. Now, what did we say about dreams before? Nobody wants to hear your dreams, but Joseph likes to hear dreams, obviously. And he says, and verse 10, and on the vine there were 3 branches, and as it budded, its blossoms came up, and its clusters of grape grew ripe, and the cup of Pharaoh was in my hand, and I took the grapes on the vine, I didn't cut them off, and I squeezed the grapes into the cup of the Pharaoh right out. Man, that's got to be, by the way, that has got to be some jacked up good grape juice. I mean, when you're squeezing it right off the vine into the cup, it's like, it don't get no better than that, right? And he squeezed them into the cup of Pharaoh. Then I placed the cup into the hand of Pharaoh. Then Joseph said to him, we never see what Pharaoh said, right? It's like, I want to know what Pharaoh said. But he says, this is the interpretation. The 3 branches are just 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head. Oh, Lord, have mercy, I hope not. And will restore you to his office. Oh, good. And you shall put the cup of Pharaoh into his hand, as was formerly the custom whenever you used to do your job, when you were his cupbearer. But remember, verse 14, remember me when it goes well with you in front of Pharaoh. And please, may you show kindness with respect to him, and mention to Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house, bring me out of this prison. For I was surely kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into this pit. So he told the man, he said, listen, I've been wronged ever since I got here. He's pleading the story. You know, you can imagine this kind of thing in prison. You know, I didn't do it. This is not my fault. And he's saying, listen to me, please, whenever you get to power, talk to power on my behalf, please. Does that make sense? Yes.
So do you think Joseph there was saying, let him tell the king I want to go back to my home?
I don't know if he was pleading that as much as he was just sort of playing off of, I've been wrong once, I've been wrong twice, can you just help a brother out?
So would he be questioning though if Yahweh is with him?
I think that's a valid question. David asked, would he be questioning if Yahweh was with him? I can't help but think that if I was in that kind of situation, that I would be asking myself, God, why does this keep happening to me? What do I need to do? Why does this continue to occur? That hit home with me because of personal reasons that we know about. It's like, why does this keep happening? I didn't do anything wrong. So now all of a sudden, verse 16, and when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good and said that Joseph said to the cupbearer, he thinks, oh, I'm going to let him go first just in case he gives bad interpretations. But, oh, he gave a good one, so I'm going to get a good one too. And so he said,
Good there means good news, not necessarily valid, just...
yes, the divination was good, the interpretation, yeah. And I also dreamed. You see the guy, he's like the little schoolgirl that's like, yeah, and I had a dream too. And you're like, in my dream, now behold, there were 3 baskets of bread upon my head. And in the upper basket were all sorts of baked foods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket upon my head. Then Joseph answered and said, by the way, birds are never like good in the Bible. Birds, oftentimes, it's like only the dove that descends on Jesus. The rest of the birds are usually like, oh no, birds. And so he said, then Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation. The 3 baskets, they are 3 days. In 3 days, verse 19, Pharaoh will lift your head from you. And he's thinking, yes, he's going to lift my head just like he lifted the cupbearers on a pole. Oh crap. You know, because what does that mean? Literally, this is not a hanging or a guillotine. I know you just had dinner, but we're just going to tell you how it actually is. They would actually make a spike, and then they would take you and they would impale you through your bottom onto the spike, and you would literally be stuck up through the spike. Okay, that's how you would die. Okay, so verse 19, in 3 days Pharaoh will lift your head from you and hang you on a pole, and the birds will eat your flesh from you. They will leave you as a symbol for other people not to cross Pharaoh in this way. Now, if you were the son of the bread baker and you grew up baking bread, what would you now do? I'm not baking bread anymore. Because I've got Dad's recipes. I'm going to do another job, the cupbearer maybe. And so in verse 20, and it happened that on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker in the midst of his servants. That's disgusting. Do you see what he did? He said, I give grace to the cupbearer, but we're going to put on a spit the other, okay?
I'm sorry, but I don't understand why. Why did he do good?
We don't know. All we know is we see in Hebrew it's called the tov and the ra, the good and the bad. And all we know is that he looked favorably upon the cupbearer and he looked unfavorably upon the bread maker. I would not read any more into it than that. That's one thing we want to be careful of, is that we don't project onto the scripture stuff that we don't really know. We don't know. But anyway, he shows mercy to one and not the other, and he literally executes him in front of his guest.
Is the language the same when it says he lifted up the head of the cupbearer? Is it the same language with he lifted up the head of the chief baker?
If I recall properly, when I looked at that this last week, the lifted is the same word. It is the same word. Yeah. And he placed the cup in the hand of Pharaoh, but the chief baker he hanged as Joseph had interpreted them, but the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. That guy, that poor dude. You're like, dadgummit, he can't catch a break. All right, so let's keep going. Verse 41, it happened that after 2 full years, Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he was standing by the Nile. Now, how old is Joseph most likely? He's in his early 20s, at best, early 20s. Okay, early 20s this guy is. 2 full years Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he was standing by the Nile. This is Pharaoh's dream. He's sleeping. And behold, 7 cows, well built and fat, were coming up from the Nile. By the way, the Nile is where all the grass is. It's only along the Nile. After I get past the Nile, not too far, literally, when I say not too far, like less than 2 miles, it's nothing. You know, they have to irrigate it. They had to carve channels off of the Nile to get more water into that place. So around the Nile, and they grazed among the reeds, the tall reeds. We know what reeds are, right? I mean, we got reeds around ponds here. And behold, 7 other cows came up after them from the Nile. You see, they emerge from, and a cow, by the way, is a god of Egypt. Did you know that? That the cattle are considered gods at this time period within Egypt. You say, Chad, how do you know that? Well, if you fast forward to the book of Exodus, what do they melt all the jewelry down in the shape of? A golden calf. And so the calf offers the god of strength. And so they emerge from another god, which, by the way, that is terribly interesting that they emerged from another god. If you remember, do y'all remember whenever we studied Marduk together? And you remember what happened in the story of Marduk? How it was the separation of the waters, and he split the animal in two, and Marduk holds open the jaws of the other and casts the spears down into it, and it splits the animal in half, and it makes the waters above and the waters below. That's the story of the Egyptian culture and how the Egyptians believed their culture was raised. So out of one god emerges another god, these cows, and behold, 7 other cows came up after them from the Nile, ugly and gaunt. You could see their ribs. And they stood beside those cows on the bank of the Nile. So they literally, the imagery is of a fat cow, a gaunt cow, a fat cow, a gaunt cow. They're standing side by side one another, is what we see. And the ugly, gaunt cows ate the 7 other fat cows in his dream. They just turn around and just devour, like a lion, these other cows. Then Pharaoh awoke from his dream, and he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. He's like, oh, what a horrible dream. What did I eat last night? No anchovies. And he fell asleep and dreamed a second time, and behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were coming out of one stalk. 7 meaning what? An image of what in Hebrew? 7 is the number of completeness, perfection. And he fell asleep and dreamed a second time, 7 stalks, verse 6, and behold, 7 thin ears of grain scorched by the east wind sprouted up after them. And the thin ears of that scorched grain swallowed up the 7 plump, full ears of grain. Then Pharaoh woke, and behold, it was a dream. I thank God that was just a dream. What a wicked, crazy dream. I cannot watch that TV show anymore before I go to bed. You know, Pharaoh's like, do not watch that. So you get this image in your mind that Pharaoh's troubled by this. And it happened that in the morning his spirit was troubled. And he sent and called all of the magicians of Egypt. Why the magicians of Egypt? They're the diviners. They're the ones that can read the livers, and they can read all these other things. And he says, and the Pharaoh, he calls these out into wise men, and Pharaoh told his dream to them. But they had no interpretation for Pharaoh. Why would you not have an interpretation for Pharaoh that was not good based on yesterday's? I remember the bread maker, Pharaoh. I don't really know what your dream means right now. I know it's bad, but I'm not going to tell you what it means because I don't want to end up like the bread maker, okay? And they just couldn't interpret the dream. And then the chief of the cupbearers spoke with Pharaoh saying, hey, I remember my sins today. Pharaoh was angry with his servant, and he put me and the chief baker in the custody of the house of Potiphar. And we dreamed a dream one night, I and, the guy that you put on a pole. And there was this young man, a Hebrew servant of the commander of Potiphar. And we told him the dream, and he interpreted our dreams for each of us. And you know what? According to his dream, he interpreted. And it happened just as he interpreted us, so it was. And you restored me to office, and you killed the other dude. When it said hanged, in our language, we think of hanged like Billy the Kid, you know, it's on gallows. Hanged, they hanged his body on a pole, okay? 14, then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph. Go get that boy! And they brought him quickly from the prison, and he shaved and he changed his clothing and came to Pharaoh. They dressed him again in the garments of a servant of the house of Potiphar. So he got his underwear on and he got his garment back from Potiphar's wife. You know, he went and got it out of the coat closet. Oh, that's Joseph. Let me go get that. I still got that. I never saw what happened to his undergarment. By the way, I can't help but think Potiphar's wife hung on to it as a whoopee. She probably smelled it. Ooh, that smells like Joseph. Verse 15, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, all these people tell each other their dreams. That just annoys me. I dreamed a dream, but there is none to interpret it. Now I have heard concerning you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph standing there. Then Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not in my power. God will answer concerning the well-being of Pharaoh. You notice what he said? Elohim. Elohim will answer. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, now in my dream, behold, I was standing on the bank of the Nile, and behold, 7 cows, well built and fat, were coming up from the Nile, and they grazed among the reeds. And behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly, looking and gaunt. Never have I seen any as them in any of the land of Egypt for ugliness. In other words, our cows are really well taken care of. These were really ugly cows. And the thin and ugly cows ate the former 7, their healthy cows. But when they went into their bellies, it could not be known that they went into their bellies. In other words, they ate it, and what was not shown?
Fullness.
The fullness. There. It didn't change the gaunt cow at all. You should see their bellies swell. I mean, they just ate a whole other cow. It should be like, I can't move, you know. It's like Bluto off of, you know. And the thin and ugly cows ate the former 7 healthy cows, but when it went into the bellies, for their appearance was as ugly as at the beginning. Verse 22, then I awoke. Then I saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears of grain. He went back to sleep. And they were coming out of one stalk, full and good. And behold, 7 withered ears of grain, thin and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them from behind them. And the thin ears of grain swallowed up the 7 good ears of grain. And I told the magicians, but there was none to explain it to me. He's pointing to his magicians. All these here could not explain it to me. Let me ask you this. When Moses comes back to free the people from Egypt, who are the ones that try to defy Moses in the presence of Pharaoh? The magicians. These men. You get that? Now, this is a long time. We're talking about a long, but the magician, the race, the belief of the magicians stay for a long time. Verse 25. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Elohim, you see that? The 7 good cows, they are 7 years, and the 7 good ears of grain, they are 7 years. The dreams are one. And the 7 thin, ugly cows come after them. They are 7 years and 7 empty years of grain, scorched by the east wind. They are also 7 years of famine. He names it finally. This is the word which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh, Elohim has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt. Then 7 years of famine will arise after them, and all the abundance of the land of Egypt from the previous 7 years will be consumed. There will be nothing left. Do you see the cows? 7 great years, and then the 7 years swallow them with nothing left. What we know is that 7 years of famine decimates the economy and the culture of Egypt. Because of why? Because the gaunt cows are absolutely not even, they don't even look different. So that's the imagery that we see. Then 7 years of famine will arise after them, and the abundance in the land of Egypt will be forgotten. Verse 31, the famine will consume the land. Abundance in the land will not be known because of the famine that follows, for it will be very heavy. Now concerning the repetition of the dream twice to Pharaoh, it is because the matter is established by Elohim, and Elohim will do it quickly. Now then, Let Pharaoh select a man who is discerning and wise, and let him set him over the land of Egypt. That's like a resume for Joseph, right? Then let him gather all the food, verse 35, for these coming good years, and let them pile up grain under the hand of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. Now, we think of Egypt and we think of Cairo, right? That's the immediate thing we think of. We think of Cairo. We're talking about the nation of Egypt. We're talking about vast swath of land. We're not talking about just a city. We're talking about the entire nation. He's saying the entire nation is going to have abundance for 7 years. Store up food for everyone in the nation. Then, verse 36, the food shall be as a deposit for the land for the 7 years of the famine that will be in the land of Egypt, that the land will not perish on account of the famine. Something will be left behind. Okay? And we're going to end there tonight. Whew. What does that make you think about when you think about what we do? What?
Kind of makes me think about what's going on there now.
Makes you think about modern times?
Yeah.
We see the cycle of the Bible go around and around and around again, right? It's just a cycle of history. We should expect no difference.
Do you think, and we have an advantage because we know the rest of the story that
Yes.
God saved Israel through this too. So is that the only reason God did that? Like just to save Israel?
Well, what we know, right, because of the later story of all the rest of the brothers coming down, that is the salvation of them. But we also...
Famine in Israel too. So I'm like, why didn't God just take care of Israel? You know, there was a famine
There was in Canaan as well.
Right, and so why didn't God just take care of them? Why did He do it through Egypt? And
He had to show forgiveness through
Joseph.
brother.
That is absolute. Yeah, that is an absolute storyline of the Bible from the thread that we cannot skip over. And so all I can say is that it is the prophetic dream of Joseph coming true in the way that he brought it. He had to bring it through that way, because how else were the brothers going to come and bow down to him? I know that's a very common story. I hope tonight that you found something different about it than what you usually have found about it. To me, it's a little bit more alive because I know the story of Joseph better now. Does that make sense? Because we've studied Joseph's history so heavily, now understanding that in this story, it makes a huge difference to me when I read this. Any other comments or questions? Real quick, and guys, leave this running live. We have on July the 18th, which is this Saturday coming up in 2020, July the 18th, just outside the YMCA here, down in the amphitheater section, we're hosting a movie night for The Chosen. The Chosen, we're going to watch episode 1 together, and it's the story of where Jesus meets Mary for the first time and heals her of a demon. If you've not seen it, it's an amazing show. Has anybody else seen The Chosen? Have y'all? Oh, it's amazing. It is absolutely wonderful. We're going to watch that story together. We've advertised it on social media. It's completely free. We do need help, so if you can come, I would ask you as part of the Bible study group, would you please come and just help with directing people, with getting people seated. We're going to have a popcorn machine here that the YMCA is going to have popcorn. We're going to have sodas and waters and all that kind of stuff, but it's going to be at dark, so we're going to start at about 8:15 is the plan. That we'll show it just down here below the picnic tables and the volleyball court, and it'll be outside seating, social distancing for any of you who are worried about COVID, and we'll be apart from one another, and we'll have drinks and popcorn and all that kind of good stuff, and we'll watch a 1-hour episode. It's 54 minutes of The Chosen together. So that's this Saturday night, starting around 8:15.
So what time would you need volunteers?
If people could be here around probably between 7:30 and 7:45, that way if we have cars starting to come up, we don't know how many people will come. It might just be all of us. That'll be fine. We'll just put mosquito spray on and go for it. So anyway, any other questions or comments about tonight? The one thing that stands out to me is Elohim and Yahweh. How, depending on who you're talking to, how that is drawn out. That sticks out to me, and I've never noticed that before in my Bible as I've studied it. So any prayer requests? Richard Edgar's mother has COVID.